All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our little session here. A couple of quick questions for the audience. How many people would consider themselves proficient programmers? All right, there's one. Well, why not? We got one. We got one. How many people are doing most of their app work using configurable apps? Great. And so now you're looking to turn those configurable apps, or you're looking to create custom apps that your org can use, correct? Yes, okay. So you've come to the right place. Who here has been to a concert recently? Okay, so who would like to share us that concert? How about you? Which concert did you go to? Roger Waters. Who was the warm-up band for Roger Waters? Didn't have one. Who went to a concert with a warm-up band? Nobody? You went to a concert with a warm-up band. So who was the lead? Who was the featured act? YouTube. And who was the warm-up band? I'm sorry, who? And were they any good? They were okay, all right. So I am like your warm-up band for this act here, okay? So my name is Bernd Zakowski. Kelly Hutchins is to the very far right, and Ian is to my near right, and we're here to do this little session on creating and publishing your own configurable apps. So let's just dive right in. One of the great things, at least for me, is that you don't have to be a great programmer now to make a custom app. And the trend has been over many years to make apps configurable, and Esri has invested quite a lot of energy in creating apps that mere mortals can configure to make them do certain things. We also have a range of apps that are focused on specific tasks that are more industry focused for utilities or local government, and those are our solution apps, and those are also configurable. But the bottom line is these are designed for you to configure. They're hosted in the cloud, meaning you don't have to host your own code. You get the advantage there is that anytime there's a change or an update, you don't really need to worry about anything because it happens in the cloud and you reap the benefits right away for that. And it's also the fastest and easiest way for you to go from a web map into a shareable app that you can share with a wide variety of others. At Esri, a web map is more than a map in the browser. It's a technical specification. So all the product development teams know exactly what a web map is. So if I'm developing code for ArcGIS Pro, I definitely know what a web map is because I'm not only consuming web maps, but I'm also publishing web maps. So this is the lingua franca of WebGIS. It's what makes the whole ecosystem go around. And we know that you author web maps in the map viewer. Some people share maps in the map viewer, but it's so easy to use a configurable app or something else that we don't often recommend that just because it's not the greatest user experience that way. But from the configurable app perspective, there's lots that you want to do to create custom configured apps that will be the default applications that people can choose in their organizations. We've done some things that may make that less necessary. So one of the new things we added with this last ArcGIS Online release is the ability for you to set a theme across your organization that includes a logo. So all the configurable apps will automatically pick up the color scheme and logos and links and things like that. So we've done some nice things there, but there's always room for improvement. There's always reasons to do more. As all of us say up here, a great app starts with a great map. And your app isn't going to be any better than the map that's consumed within it. And that includes everything from cartography. Smart mapping has really helped us come a long way in making much better maps. It includes simple things like just thinking about transparency, scale ranges, and bookmarks, which some of the app templates support. But it's other things like pop-ups, which is my big pet peeve. I always hate to see an unconfigured pop-up and like to see a much nicer configured pop-up. But more than that, it's also about performance. So there's various ways that you can publish your data, hosted feature tiles, hosted feature layers. Now there's vector tiles. There's lots of different ways that you can publish that. And you need to think about that because your app experience is no better than the web map experience inherently. And if you've got a slow web map, you're going to have a slow app as well. The apps really complete the user experience. They give you an opportunity to present the right tools to their target audience, and it could be to support specific users or specific workflows. Now, by default, when you create a web app, you can go to the Create a New Web App gallery, and you can pick sort of a theme. You answer the question, what do you want to do? And that presents a filter on the different configurable apps that are there. And the goal of this workshop is to show you how to extend or replace the configurable apps that you see there in that gallery. But we're going to begin with just a couple little basics just to make sure we're all on the right track here. So again, this is the warm-up band part here. So let's see how we do. Let's go ahead and make a quick web map. And here is a collection of traffic cameras in Santa Clara that I scraped from actually one of their story maps. So I drag and drop it, and here's the traffic cam. Smart mapping kind of takes over, and it finds a field that it can symbolize on, which is name. Of course, we can override these things, and let's do location only. And let's make that a little bit larger symbol. And we'll just change the size a little bit, and we'll leave it at that. So there's our symbol of traffic cameras. Now, typically, what I see a lot are things like this. It's just a dump of GIS attributes, and we don't really want to see that. So real quickly, we're going to turn this into something a little more interesting, because this has interesting things in it. One of the things it has in it is like a little snap from the traffic cam that I want to show in the pop-up, and we'll go ahead and leverage that. So very quickly, I know this is old hat for many of you. We'll just quickly kind of cover this. So let's go in here and let's configure the pop-up. And anything in curly braces is the attribute. So the name will be the title, which I see over here. That's the location. That's good. I can configure a list of field attributes. I can do this by creating aliases, cleaning them up, getting rid of all the caps, hiding things like object ID. I think we all know how to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and say no attribute information, and I'm going to, pardon me, we'll get to that later. I'm going to go ahead and add an image, and I'm going to title this tap to view larger image, because we can use this on a tablet too. So we tap there, not click. And I'm going to choose a couple of the attributes that we have here. So we have a thumbnail, and we also have a larger picture. This is pretty cool. So this is kind of worth suffering through, because when we save it, we now have a much better display of that attribute information. So I've got the little thumbnail, and when I click on it, this is pretty neat. This is actually a moving little thing. And I think what they're using on the background is a content management system, just because of the URL that I see up there, and it's obviously either pushing through some streaming video on the back end, or it's doing some rapidly updating imagery. And it looks like every second it looks like we're getting a new image. That's pretty neat. Anyway, that's just a real quick lesson on pop-ups. Now, one thing that was introduced real recently, in fact with this last release, is the ability to include something called Arcade. And use that, you can use it actually to style your maps. You can also use it to make great pop-ups. And let's take a quick look at that. These are crimes in DC. The red ones are homicides. And you can see it's just a dump of information. But I see we have a method here, and that's how that crime was committed. This one was committed using a gun. And let's click on another one. This one was committed using a other. Not very descriptive, but you get the idea. There's different attributes in here. Now, I'd like to style this pop-up a little bit, but I'd like to do this in a really interesting way. So when I configure the pop-up, one of the things that you'll find is there's this new section called Attribute Expressions. And I can add a new expression by clicking the Add button, and I give it a title, and I begin by creating an expression. And if you know a little bit of code, this is a really great place for you to leverage your capabilities and do some cool things. So I can start writing a little bit of code. $feature is the feature currently chosen or clicked feature, and then the rest is the attribute itself. There's a list of functions we can use and combine these things together, and I've kind of created some already to shortcut my typing, but let's take a look at those right away. So here's my goal. I want to create a pop-up that returns the word gun if it's a gun, but I want that in bold red. If it's not a gun, I want that in bold blue, and I'm not going to differentiate what it is. So here's an expression which, if we look at this, it says, if the method is a gun, return the method. Otherwise, return nothing. That sounds kind of odd, but what I wanted to do is pull out the word gun and identify that uniquely from all the rest. And this little expression is just, if it's not a gun, just tell me what it is, and we're done there. The trickier one is kind of this one. This is kind of cool. I wanted to put an image in the pop-up that was related to the method used. So I have I've added actually a couple of images to my ArcGIS Online account, and here's one. You know, if you add an image and make it public, you can come down here and copy the URL, and that's what I've got here in this expression. So that's just the URL to the different images. So if it's a gun, I want to display that image of a gun. Otherwise, I'm just going to put in like a little thumbprint as a generic crime indicator. So that's my goal here. So let's go back to DC Crimes, and let's go ahead and begin configuring the pop-up. So in this case, we're going to do a custom attribute display. And custom attribute displays are kind of neat because we can combine natural text with everything else. Let's expand this a little bit. Okay, so I can say the crime was committed with a, and I'm going to use that if gun. So that's going to pull out the gun if it's a gun, and I'm going to make that bold, and I'm going to make that red. And then after that, I'm going to, you can see once I created an expression, it shows up like an attribute. Here's not gun, because everything that's not a gun, I want to make that bold, and I want to make that blue. So it's just like a little switch there. If the expression evaluates to null, then it just doesn't appear. So one or the other is going to appear, and then it'll either be in red or blue depending on what it is. So I think you can follow that logic. Let's do the other logic now for adding an image. So this is kind of like what we did before. I won't change the title, I'll just leave that for now, but let's go ahead and choose that expression image URL. So what this is doing, it's just branching on the method, and it'll either display the gun or a thumbprint depending on what's returned. So let's click OK, and let's see if we did this correctly. So there we go. The crime was committed with a gun in bold red, and there we've got the image displayed. And one of these other crimes is committed with number 2, which apparently is a bad number here. So obviously I haven't cleaned up the database here, but these different crimes are committed different ways, and if it's other than a gun, there we go, a stolen auto, it gets a thumbprint there. So just keep that in mind. This is new stuff, and you can do some pretty amazing things with it. Once, of course, we're done with configuring our map, we can go ahead and share it. And you all know this is how to create a configurable application. We can come up here, create a web app. You're going to be creating a custom gallery here. I'm going to choose one of these and just get us through the basics of how to do this. When I select one, I get a couple of sentences of what it does. I can preview it. So this would be that nicely crafted map here, kind of previewed. I use this for quick sharing. My boss wants a map real quick. Instead of using the map viewer, I just preview it in one of these templates, and off it goes to them, and it's a little better experience. But really what I want to do is I want to create the web app. And this creates a new item. And we'll just go ahead and click Done, and this opens up the configuration panel for the configurable app. And Ian and his team, Kelly and others, have spent a bunch of time going through these to kind of even out the experience between all of them. So what you'll find is the tabs across the top are generally the same or similar, and then the order in which you do things goes from perhaps the most frequently used to the less frequently used. I'm just going to change one thing. I'm going to take that pop-up and show it in the side panel. When we're done configuring, I click Save. We have a preview here of what things look like. Once I do that, and if I click this crime, there it is. It appears, it doesn't look like the side panel, but that is the side panel in this case. So anyway, that's how we configure an app. One last thing that I wanted to show real quickly is, let's go back to that little crime app. Actually, let's go to 3D. So there are configurable apps for 3D as well. So here's a scene. I just found this a little while ago. Someone tweeted this on the Esri UC. This was pretty neat. This is Helsinki, a great little scene. And just like for web maps, you can share, and there's a gallery of applications that you can use for 3D things. So Scene Styler is kind of a neat one, and we can preview it in there. Again, these have a configuration panel that let you choose various options that you want to display here. So it's a 3D scene, and there it is shown in that configurable app. So that's something you can do as well. Let's go back to, all right, our DC crimes. One final thing I'm going to show you. Here is a kind of a dull and boring web page that really needs a web map. Now, a really interesting thing that we can do when we share, we didn't cover this the last workshop, so this is kind of a bonus, or you can embed. And this is almost like making a custom application because you can check the toggles here, decide what you want. I'm going to have a base map selector. We'll make that a toggle, and I'll toggle between the current base map and the, let's do the street space map, and I can add a legend, details, all that stuff, whatever I want. When I'm happy with what I see here, I just go ahead and, let's see, I've got a fixed width page, and I believe that's 900 pixels wide. This will be responsive, so this will keep this aspect ratio. The HTML is generated automatically for me, and all I need to do is go into, there we go, there's the source code for the web page, and I just kind of come in here, drop it in there, go ahead and save that. And now if I come back to this example and refresh, we've got my nice little application, and it's got that nice little pop-up that we've configured with the image and so forth. So these are a bunch of different off-the-shelf, ready-to-use default options for you. And from here, we're going to turn things over to Ian, and we'll start working on some of the custom configurable options.
I don't think I'm plugged into the switcher.
Okay. You want to steal 3?
Yeah, if I could do that.
Pardon us, we'll have a...
I don't think we had enough. Okay. So Bern showed authoring a great map, sharing it quickly with a configurable app. We're going to go into configurable apps in more detail in just a moment. But before we did that, we want to take a brief interlude to talk about Web App Builder. So most of you are probably familiar with Web App Builder. It's a builder that allows you to assemble a collection of widgets within the theme of your choosing and create a custom application. One of the things that's useful about it is if you find yourself building the same application on a regular basis, you don't need to always go to Web App Builder to do that. You can export the application that you've configured from Web App Builder as a template and then surface that in the Configurable Apps gallery. And we'll have a demo that kind of ties that all together later. But just for now, let's take a quick look at Web App Builder. So I've created a application. And for our purposes today, the nature of the application isn't important. But like I said, if you're building something on a regular basis and you want to facilitate others in your organization to use that same collection of widgets, that same theme, and everything that you've authored, you're going to want to follow this workflow. So the way that this is laid out, there's tabs across the top. I choose my theme first. And I'm not performing very well here. Just one sec. Hasn't loaded. Okay, this is looking promising. There we go. So you select your theme first. At that point, you can choose a style. You can choose a layout if your theme supports it. You'd select your map. And then you'd configure your widgets. Now, what I've done in this case, for the most part, is I've turned off some of the things that aren't really important for my users. So I've turned off the coordinates. I might turn off the scale bar if that's not relevant for my use case. And then I've added some of the tools that I want to the Launchpad container at the bottom. So at this point, I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to export it as a template. And then at this point, I can configure the properties that I want to include in my configurable app. And on the right-hand side of the panel, you can see what I've exposed as configurable options. I think I'm going to add, we got title, subtitle. I think I'm going to add logo. Actually, no, I'm going to add the ability to include a full screen button. I'll save that, and I'll export it. And then this will create a new item that I can use as a configurable app. So I'll just call this Web Template. And then I'll put it in my folder. I'll click OK. My name already existed. How was that? What are the odds of that? I was starting to feel like that was a bug. Okay, so there's a nice message. It says it was exported successfully. I can click here to see the details. So let's go to the item page. And then at that point, what I can do is I can share that with a group. And in this case, it's going to be shared with this custom UC application group. And then I'm also going to share it with everyone. So when our org is configured to use that group, then this will be included alongside the other configurable apps in our gallery. Okay, so that's just quick and dirty web app builder overview. What we're going to look at next is some of the web application, I hesitate to call this anatomy, it's sort of architecture, and then we'll talk about some considerations that you might want to take into mind as you're configuring applications. So each item in ArcGIS Online or Portal has an ID. That's going to be the unique identifier, the serial number or the social security number that tells that tells you that uniquely identifies that piece of content. And when you create your own custom applications, that will become important because that's something that you might provide within your code to use your map. Web maps and web scenes are composed of JSON, and our applications know how to take that JSON and turn it into the visualization of your map. It comes in two pieces. There's the information or the metadata about the item. That tells you things such as the item ID, the owner, any of the description that you've put in there. And then there's the data, which includes all the operational layers and the information about the data in the map. When you save a configurable application, this is what is saved. So the application source code is, there's only one instance of it. So if we look at the basic viewer, there's only one basic viewer that lives in ArcGIS Online. And when you create an application from the basic viewer, this is what is saved. A reference to the source item, that being the basic viewer, and then the values that you've saved in your configuration. So when it opens up, it loads the basic viewer source, and then it applies the values that you've saved in your configuration file. So one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with these templates is making it easy for people to configure and reuse applications. The default gallery of configurable apps that we've been building is sort of purpose-built towards solving certain common use cases. So we have things like telling stories, collecting data, comparing maps and layers, routing, getting directions. There's use cases for a variety of things, and I think Bernie mentioned it earlier. When you're faced with creating an application, that's one of the questions you should be asking yourself first. You know, what am I trying to accomplish? And then you can use this UX to help narrow down the options. So some considerations as far as app design. You're going to want to think about usability. Again, what's the purpose of your application? Who is it for? What are the 1 to 5 bits of information that you're hoping that they'll be able to extract from your application? Is it designed for someone like Bern, who's very savvy, or is it designed for your mom, who may or may not be savvy, or maybe your dad is a little bit less of an offensive term? I'll have to change that slide.
Just use parent.
Your parent, yes. Is it for Bern or for your parent? Very good. And then think about, by default, we make some choices as far as what's included in the application. And I would encourage you to consider, just because it's on by default, do you actually need it? We've done usability testing where we had the exact same application, the exact same map, and users were more successful with the narrow scope of options. We saw some of the more tech-savvy testers get distracted for minutes with the base map gallery widget. So if you don't think that there's a need to include a base map gallery widget, leave it out there because people will get absorbed in it and just flip through the different base maps and become distracted. So the other thing to consider is search. So configuring your search experience to really give a narrow path to your users to find the features that they want. It may not always be a good idea to include the Esri World Locator. I'll have a demo that shows an option where we don't include that. If you need address locating, it may be a good idea to use that, but you may want to consider restricting the scope of what that's going to search to the extent of your map. The last couple of things are giving some descriptive text or some information about your map to help orient your users. And then lastly, applying a theme and potentially a logo. And we'll have a demo that looks at the color contrast in just a moment. So all the apps have configurable options. As Bern mentioned, we've done some work to standardize the tabs. All of them will have a general tab, a theme tab, an options tab, and they should have a search tab. And then if the application supports some unique bit of functionality like a time slider or a lookup layer type of a thing, then they'll have additional tabs. But as you go through the collection of configurable apps, if you're wanting to do something like change the color, you're going to be able to look in the same place in each application to achieve that same objective. So these options that you see in the configuration panel are defined in JSON, and Kelly will be showing how that kind of is wired up later. I mentioned the descriptive text. We saw Bernie demo authoring a pop-up. We use basically the same text editor for the web map description and the places in the configurable app builders that we let you author descriptions. So if you've authored a web map and have a really great description, the app should just let that come through. If you need to alter that text or write a different description, you can do that in the configuration experience of the app. I mentioned search. Oftentimes, we name something that's meaningful to us and to our users. So in this case, we've highlighted Esri World Geocoder. To my parents, that's going to mean nothing. It's probably going to be confusing. Also, look at what's in your org. Sometimes we'll end up with something called test or something that may not have a useful name. We talked about configuring the search to restrict the search within the extent of the map. I'll show a demo on that. And then the last thing that you might want to configure is suggestions. So if you're using the world locator in online, or you have your own geocode server that's 10.3 or above, or a feature layer that's 10.3 or above that supports pagination, you'll be able to configure suggestions on that search source. We also support custom URL parameters in many of the configurable apps. So this would be useful if you have a web page that asks for input from a user and then you want to redirect them to the map. You could take that input and map it to this parameter and then navigate the map to that location. Some of the features, due to security concerns and privacy considerations, are only available over HTTPS. One of those is geolocation. So if you need this in your application, make sure that you're using HTTPS as your protocol. And in general, if you're not already in a HTTPS environment, we would suggest that you move in that direction. I mentioned the theme. So we do have color pickers in the applications that support setting a custom theme. So you can pick from our pre-selected values, or you can provide your own hex codes to style the application. For some of the smaller shops, you may have carte blanche to make these look however you want, but for other organizations, you may already have a style sheet that is defined by your organizational brand. So we do support the full range of hex codes. Some considerations for logo. We see this quite a bit where someone has a nice application with a logo that has a white background. That works if the background of the application is white, but we do see this quite a bit. And then make sure that if you are embedding a logo that you do have it in a place where it's publicly accessible so you can avoid having a broken image in the header. I mentioned the shared theme. This is something that we introduced at the Dev Summit release. So this will allow an admin of an organization to set a collection of hex codes to define header color, background and text, body color, background and text, button color, background and text, and then also a logo image and an optional logo link. So you don't have to set all of these values, but the ones that you do set, when you go into the Configurable App Builder, that value will be inherited as the default value for that setting. We made a choice to allow end users to override these, and we've decided not to change existing themes that have been applied. So if you configure this, anything that was created before it was configured will not have this theme applied, but anything created after will inherit the theme. Many of them support custom CSS, so if you don't like the layout or you want to make some subtle tweaks to the application, we do allow you to override some of the stylings, and we'll see a demo in just a few minutes that shows that. So with that, let me get to the demo section. So in Bernd's demo, we saw creating an application from a map. In the map viewer, we expose a collection of configurable apps that support web maps. So if you're looking to create something that is based upon a scene or a group, there's two places to see all of the apps that are available. If you go to the gallery, Esri featured content, and then apps, you'll see all of the configurable apps that we have built into the platform, and you can filter those through that kind of same purpose-driven experience in this navigation pane. So if you wanted to see what we have available for 3D, you can filter based on 3D. If you wanted to see what we have in terms of a gallery application, you can see that here. And the same way that authoring a great map is what drives a great mapping application, configuring a group to be configuring your group to have a collection of well-crafted items is going to go a long way to making sure that your gallery applications look nice. So you can see here, this group has clearly defined titles, it has thumbnails for everything, and it's a fairly nice looking application. All of that content is coming from the item of the members of this group, and it's going to be the equivalent of authoring a great map and configuring your pop-ups. So things like making sure that the items have clear titles, making sure that the items have nice thumbnails, that's going to be the key to having a good group or gallery application. Same thing with the scene. We have several applications that support web scenes. If you've authored a nice web scene, that's going to come right through. And again, that tradecraft of authoring the scene is going to be the most important thing to having a successful 3D application. So with that, I'm going to go to My Content. And this is the second place that you can interact with all of the configurable apps. So from the Create menu, you choose Using a Template. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. We've configured the org to have a custom group.
I can change it back.
I got it. So that will be important later, but it's a little bit early for it now. So let me go back to the content page. I'll choose Create Using a Template. And we'll see that same option for filtering on the left-hand side here. So what I would like to do is create an application using the basic viewer. And in this case, my goal is to build a parcel locator. So I've chosen my application. It's going to take me into the configuration panel. And it's going to prompt me to select a map. And I've already created one called Parcel Finder. And for my purposes here, I'm going to accept the default values that I've authored in the web map. I'm going to accept the default theme because I'm really just focused on getting this up and running. Let's take a look at the options really quick. I think after my speech earlier about the base map gallery, it wouldn't be right if I didn't turn it off. So I'm going to only leave the print tool and the share tool. And my assumption there is if someone's interacting with this, they might want to find their parcel and print the map of it, or potentially send it to someone that they know. So I'll save that. We'll see the application is updated with the new, more refined set of tools. So I've just got the 2 tools there. And then I'm going to configure search. So we talked about this earlier. In this case, I don't really need people to use the world locator. That's useful for a lot of applications. But in this case, I'm going to disable that, and I'm going to set up feature search on the parcel layer. Once I've enabled it, I'll click Edit, and that will allow me to configure the search experience a little bit more fully. So I'm going to add some placeholder text. Let's say we want to allow users to search by parcel ID. So I'll try to provide a fairly clear, straightforward call to action. I'll say enter parcel ID. I'm going to enable suggestions, and I think maybe 5 suggestions will be a nice place to start. I'm going to choose to display the suggestions using a field, and in this case I think I'd also like to use parcel ID for the display field and for the search field. So when I save my configuration, we can go back in and start testing the application. So you can see this is an iterative process. Anytime you're building an application, you're going to want to have a clear set of expectations for what you want to accomplish, and then actually start to test it. So if I type in my name, I'm not getting any results because my name is not a parcel ID. But if I start to type in a number, I get a set of suggestions that include that string. And then I can navigate to this lovely property that I don't actually own. But let's say I want to add support for searching for parcel ID and searching for owner ID. I can go back into the configuration panel for the parcel layer search, and I'm going to choose to display suggestions based on a template. And the suggestion template has the syntax $, curly brace, field name, curly brace. You can also add some strings before or after to help clarify the information that you're presenting in the suggestion. I've authored one ahead of time. So this will show owner, owner name, comma, ID, and then the parcel ID. And then for my search fields, I want to include parcel ID still, but I also want to include owner name. The way that I get the multi-select is I hold down Control and click both of them, and then I should be all set. So if I save, when I type my name, I do see that I own some properties. The other thing that would probably be useful is to update the placeholder text to say something like enter parcel ID or owner name. Just to, again, really refine and clarify the expectations that you have of your end users.
Does that override the settings when the map is published inside of ArcGIS Online? Because you can also do that inside of ArcGIS Online when you author a map and you share it in the settings.
Yep. So the question was, if you've configured a web map to have a layer search in the web map details, so that if it's been authored there, it should be discovered by the search widget, and then you can either choose to use that as it was authored, or you can override it. Okay, so we saw parcel search. So the next thing that I wanted to do was make a map that does that provides a time slider and test some color palette options. So I'm going to search for Africa, and I'm going to look at my Africa conflicts map. So the layer in this map has time-aware data. So you can see that I've got a time slider configured here. But if I want to share this with a different audience and really style the UI of the app, I can do that in a configurable app. I'll share. I'll create a web map, and then I want to look for something that's time related. So I'm just going to search for time. I'll select the time-aware template, and I will choose to create a new application. This will take me into the configuration panel, and you can see there's some similarities in the tab. We've got general, we've got theme, we've got options, but this has some tabs that are specific to this application. In my case, I'm going to change some of the themes, and I think I want to make, okay, I want my background color to be that slate gray, and I want the text, since this is related to kind of, fatalities in war in Africa, I'm going to make it a little bit more relevant to that theme. So I'm going to make the text red. And what we're going to do now is compare the background color to the text color. So one of the things that I've been noticing is that if I make an application and it's hard for me to read, it's probably going to be hard for other people to read. So one thing that you want to keep in mind is having enough color contrast between the background and the foreground. And one of the ways that you can check that is to use a color contrast analyzer. So in this case, I'm going to use the one from WebAIM. And what I can do is just take my background color and provide it as the background color here. Take my foreground color and provide that as my foreground color. And you can see already that there's some feedback in the page that shows what it actually looks like. And I'm failing all sorts of guidelines for the ratio. So what's nice about this is that if I wanted to come up with a new color palette for my application, I could modify these hex codes until I pass the WCAG AA standard, and then I'll have a better idea of what to move forward with. So I'm just going to darken the background text a little bit until I pass. And then at that point, hopefully this will be a little bit easier to read. So I don't know if it's perfect, but the last one did kind of hurt my eyes a little bit. But that's just an idea of how you can take some of the design choices that you're making in your applications and test them using some of the accessibility guidelines for web development. And I think with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kelly to talk about custom.
Thanks, Ian. I have a microphone. So the first thing I'm going to show you is actually Ian mentioned it on his slide and said we'd demo it later. It was the custom CSS. So this is a capability offered in many of the apps, and we added it because we've noticed that sometimes people want to change little things without downloading and hosting the app locally on their own web server, which is what you need to do if you want to change big things. So we have an app here. It's a basic viewer app. This is the way it looks out of the box. And we've specified this yellow color for the title and some of the tools. But what if we just wanted to change maybe the title, or if we had a title and subtitle, if we just wanted to change the color of the subtitle text? Well, you could download it and host it locally and do that, but that's a lot of work for a tiny tweak. So I'm working in Chrome right now, so I can use the Chrome developer tools to play around with the title and make it look the way I want. Those changes are temporary, so it's a great way, even if you're not a web developer and you're not familiar with CSS, it's a great way to play around and see if you can get it looking the way you want. And then you copy the changes you made and you're going to paste it into the application. So let's say we just wanted to make this title a little bit bigger and a different color. So we can right-click in the title area, choose Inspect, and it opens up these developer tools with that element highlighted. And you can see all of the CSS rules that are associated with that element. And I can come in here and I can just type color, and let's say we want to make this white. So I could change the color to white. And I can make the font size a little bit larger, or I could specify a particular pixel value if I wanted to make it really large. But I can play around with this until I get it the way I want. I can use the tools in here. If you click on the color, there's this little thumb dropper tool that will let you actually pick a color from somewhere in your app. So if I wanted, to maybe use one of these background colors, I could do that. And then when you have it looking the way you want, you're going to copy that CSS. And I'm just going to show you that if I refresh this app, that the changes I made were temporary. I didn't change anything permanent in the application. So now it's back to my yellow text. But if I come here to theme, go to the custom CSS section, paste in that CSS, and hit save. If I copied it correctly, now we see we have that larger font size in that white color. And now it's a permanent change to our application. So you can do simple things like that where you just change one little thing in the app. Or if you know CSS or you become more familiar with CSS by playing around, you can do lots of different things, changing the look and feel of the app. So here's a more complicated example where we've changed the header to be the full width of the top of the panel. We've moved the zoom controls to the bottom right corner. And we've made this search box a little bit larger and centered it. So that was all done with this custom CSS that we pasted into this box down here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is building a custom configurable app. So Ian and Bernie showed you some great tricks for making better configurable apps using the hosted app. So configuring your search and checking your color contrast to make sure your app meets 508 or WCAG guidelines, and just making pretty pop-ups and pretty maps. And those are all really crucial. I've found that the better the map looks, the better your app looks. So I think that those are steps that we sometimes forget. We're just worried about making an app that looks nice. But this was really driven home to me right before the release where we added smart mapping for the first time. The day of the release, I was looking at some apps that were created that day. And just the smart mapping changes made the maps look better, which made the apps look 100% better. I was like, wow, you guys made my apps look so much more professional than they did before. So spend some time on the things that they suggested. So sometimes you can't do what you want with a hosted app, and you have to look at making a custom app. There are a few different options that you can use. You can start with one of the existing applications. So you can take maybe the basic viewer or the geoform. You can take the URL to that app, get the configuration properties, and make some changes, and have a custom item that has your specific configuration options that you want to apply. This is great if you want to change the defaults that are on the configuration panel. For example, maybe in your organization, you never want people to turn on the legend for some reason, or you always want, or you never want them to turn on the share tool, or you always want the share tool on by default, or you always want print on by default. So you can go in and change those app defaults and make a custom version of that app that has your organization's app defaults set as the app defaults. And we'll show you how to do that in a minute. The next option is you can download one of the configurable apps. The source code is available on GitHub for every single one of the apps. You can download it, host it on your own web server, and write all the JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that you want to do whatever you want. That's a great option if you want to do something like you think that an app is perfect for you, but you really wish it had this custom tool that's specific to your organization. You write that custom tool and insert that JavaScript, HTML, and CSS into that app. The last option is you start from scratch, build your own app, and add it back into the app gallery. So I mentioned that the source code was available for all of the configurable apps. So if you go to the app gallery, you see that there's a download link. You click that download link and it takes you to GitHub, where you can either clone it if you log in and have a GitHub account, or you can just download it as a zip file. So that's a great option, that download, if you just want to do a simple customization or a more advanced customization to the existing source code. And I'll show you a demo of getting that running on your own local web server. So here's an example of what the GitHub repository looks like. The button you want to use to download is that green button that says clone and download. So let's take a look at that and how we'd set it up on our web server. So somewhere in here, I have, nope, of course I closed that window. Okay, so let's go to the gallery. Esri featured content, apps. And here are all of the apps. So here is where we can go to the details page for the basic viewer, for example, and download. Takes you to GitHub. GitHub, I can download it, and I can download that zip file. I copy the source code in that zip file. So this is that zip. It was extracted locally in my download file. I can just copy that whole folder, and I can paste it into my web server root directory. This is going to change depending on your environment, if you're working on a Mac or Windows. But if you're not sure what your web server root directory is, you can talk to your IT people, and they can help you figure out where that location is. So here I have this app. Now I can just come in here and test it. I'm going to open that file using Chrome. And if everything wants to cooperate with me. So now I have the basic viewer hosted locally. So all I did was downloaded it, copied it to my web server root directory. I have all the source code available to me now. So if we go back to Finder and look at it, I can see that I have the CSS associated with this app, the JavaScript associated with this app, and the HTML. So if you're a web developer, you can start diving in. Even if you're not a web developer, you might find that there are little changes that you can make by looking on the forum or talking to other people or just starting to play around with it. So once you've created a custom app, maybe you've downloaded it and are hosting it locally, you've created an app and you have a URL to that app. So if we go back to my custom app, it's running on my web server. I can copy this URL, maybe not with localhost because that's specific to my machine. So, okay, so now I could copy this URL, create a new item in ArcGIS Online, and I can add this app to my configuration template gallery. So to create a new application item in ArcGIS Online and add it to a custom gallery, you create this new app item. You define the purpose as configurable. You give it the URL to your custom app that's hosted locally, or maybe to an existing app like the basic viewer or the geoform where you want to change the configuration options. So you provide the URL, give it a title and tags. And then the next thing you have to do is actually make the app configurable. So all the configurable apps have some options that can be changed. These are things that can be turned on or off. Colors that can be set. The way we do this is through a JSON file. So we have a JSON file that has all these well-known options. Things like that select web map button. If you wanted that to appear in your custom configurable app, you would specify a type of web map. It's probably kind of hard to see. I have it a little bit bigger here, maybe. Let's see. So all I have to do in my JSON file is create this type web map, and then that button is going to appear, that web map button. For Boolean things that you want to enable, disable, like add or remove a legend, you just say type Boolean, provide the name of a field, and a label that's going to appear on that dialog, and more. So we also have options where you can display a base map type, and that'll list all of the Esri base maps. So the documentation for all of these types is available in the ArcGIS Online help. If you search for the help topic titled Add Configurable Parameters to Templates, this will show you all the options you have to make your app configurable. Once you've created that configuration, sorry, I went the wrong direction. Once you've created that configuration, you paste that JSON into the item in the configuration parameters section. And now we have this configuration JSON that's used to construct that configuration panel. So all the options you provided as options people can set on your app are there. So Ian showed you this slide earlier with the configuration details and mentioned that there was only ever one copy of the source code. So your application, there's one copy of it. When people create new apps based on that application, all we're doing is creating this JSON file. So your application needs to be smart enough to know how to read that JSON file and look at these values. These values are what people set on the configuration panel. So if they set the legend to true, my source code needs to say, did they set the legend to true? If they did, let's add the legend. Did they set the background color to orange? If they did, let's apply that background color. Once you've set all of these items, you've set your configuration option, you've set your URL, it's time to share these items to a group. So what you do is create a custom group, share your app to that group, and then ask your org administrator to set that group as the gallery group. So I'll show you that because I think Ian set it back. So we want to go into our org and set our custom group as the gallery group. So in my organization, I can edit settings, and under map, I can set the configurable apps group to our custom group, which is right here. And another option I have is to share the Esri default configurable apps to that group as well. So maybe you just want to add your custom app and then have all the Esri out-of-the-box apps as well. Or maybe you just want your custom apps. So we'll do just our custom apps and save that. So now when we go to create a new application based on a web map, our gallery is only going to contain the apps that we've created unless we checked on that checkbox to include the Esri ones as well. So let's go and just look at that in action. So I have a web map. It's got data on all the Bigfoot sightings or sightings of Sasquatch. This information was scraped from this geographical database of Bigfoot sightings. It's kind of interesting to go through and read all the descriptions of people, how they thought they heard or saw Bigfoot. But from this web map, we can create a web app using a template. Now we see we have 3 configurable apps here. One of them is the web app builder export that Ian created and shared to this group. The other one is a basic viewer app that I customized by reducing the amount of things that were allowed on the configuration panel and setting some different defaults. And the third is a custom application that I created starting from almost scratch. We have a helper app I'll show you in a minute that gets you most of the way there. So let's take a look at this custom app. So this one's called Hover Pop-Up. We can create a new web app on that. Okay, so here I have the configuration panel that lets me do things like disable some options. This is a pretty simple configuration panel. There's only a few things that they can change. You can change the default base map. We can turn on the home and turn off some other options. So let's save it, and then we can launch it. So this is a pretty simple app. Basically the only thing that it really does is that instead of clicking on these points, you hover over them and it displays the pop-up on hover. So it's just an example of a simple application you might create for some use in your organization that's not available with the out-of-the-box apps. So how did we create that? That's the next piece of information we want to go over. So you can start from scratch. You can start writing some JavaScript. You can figure out how to write code that queries that custom JSON to find all those default values people set and apply them in your code. You can research and figure out how to find out the shared theming information for an org and learn how to apply that. You can add internationalization if you want this thing to be available in multiple languages. Or you can start with this helper class that we've created. So we have a class called the application base.js. It's available in GitHub, and I'll show you this repository. I think I have it open somewhere. Here it is. So it's called Esri/application base. So this is just a core class that's used for creating configurable applications, and it knows how to do stuff like query the online portal to get that application information so you as the developer can take that information and apply it to your custom app. And it's already set up to handle a lot of the logic that takes an app and turns it into an app that can live in the ArcGIS Online base map gallery. So we created this so that you as developers don't have to worry about all the stuff that I call template crap or configurable app crap. That's all stuff that this is going to do. You just need to write your own custom app code. So it's maybe a map that has some custom tools or shows pop up on hover or whatever it is that you want to do. That's all that you have to worry about. This app was written in TypeScript. You don't need to know TypeScript to use it. We have a lot of documentation here, so you can just read through it, find out about all the properties that are available to you, and look at it. It's set up to help you create configurable apps that work with groups in ArcGIS Online, web maps, or 3D apps, web scenes. So it's set up to cover all those bases. And because this is, a big class with lots of things going on, we also created a separate repo called Configurable App Examples that shows you how to create a custom group app, a custom 3D app, and a custom 2D app. For all of these, we have both a JavaScript version of the sample and a TypeScript version of the sample. So whichever you feel more comfortable working in, you can work in those. And then for that configurable app, the hover pop-up one that I created, if you're interested in looking at the source code for that to see how that works, I have it in my own GitHub repo. So if you just go to github.com/Kelly Hutchins, it's in this TypeScript samples repository, and it's called WebMap Hover. And if you look at that, you'll see it uses that application base, so that's that base class. And then my custom code is all in this source file, so you could come into this source file and look at the custom code, including defaults for the application. And then this configuration parameters.js is an example of what that configuration JSON looks like. So remember I told you it was a really simple one. This allows them to pick a web map, specify a title, and turn on the legend, home, or info tools, and also set the base map. So that's an example of custom configuration. So we showed you that demo, and I think unless Bernie or Ian have something else that they want to demo, that we've finished our content and we can answer questions.
With the custom CSS for the existing templates, is there any way to bring in web fonts? Fonts are one of the biggest things that I'd like to change. That's a little thing.
Yeah, so the question is with the custom CSS, is there any way to bring in web fonts? And sort of, if the web fonts are available through a URL, you can specify them potentially through a URL. I'd have to try that and see how it would work. If it's a well-known font where you could just specify the name, like Arial or Times New Roman that's defined and you don't need to download the custom font, then that will work. I can give you my card afterwards and we can try it with a URL.
I specified that in the HTML file with the CSS.
Right. Yeah, I do have apps where we use the font file in the CSS from a URL. I just haven't tried it in the app. I don't know if things will get stripped out. So we'd have to try it in the custom CSS and see if it would work. We have thought about exposing ways for people to change the font, but there's still the problem of like these custom fonts that people can get from everywhere and licensing and where do we host it, and so there's issues around it. But if you have a URL to it, it might work through the CSS. You can define like a font face and the font families. So, maybe. Anybody else?
Is there a way to configure a single pop-up to show attributes from multiple layers?
So that question has come up a lot at this conference. I've never heard it before, and I've heard it 3 times. So it sounds like what you want to do is have one pop-up that shows the content from multiple features without having to navigate between them. Because right now, if you click on a feature and there's 3 features underneath, you can use the arrows to navigate between the pop-ups. So the answer is no, not out of the box. You could certainly write a custom application that does that. So that's a way of doing a custom template.
I actually have an idea. Can I borrow the mic? Sure. I think we do have one that does that. Yeah, I actually have a little idea that might help you out there. So a layer has to be turned on to be clickable, but it doesn't have to be visible. So one thing you could do is you could have all your layers on, maybe some of those not visible. When you click, you're going to get that, the little arrow that shows the multiplicity of the features that you found, and then the viewer could kind of page through those as they go through things. Might help, I don't know. Depends on your case.
I think that's what they're trying to avoid is the page through arrows.
Oh, is that
They
right?
want, I think, is it all the content in one?
Okay.
Get multiple layers.
Let me see if I can do it. Have you looked at the information lookup? So we have configurable
You're not
app.
showing. Which
Sorry.
number are you, Ian? Oh, here.
We have a configurable app called the information lookup, and let me see if I can.
You're not actually.
Oh, am I not plugged in? Wait, no.
But that's a good example, if Ian's approach doesn't work for you, of making a custom configurable application, because you can certainly query for all that layer info and apply it to a pop-up.
I'll try to set one up really quick. So if you want to hold on, if anybody has any other questions while I set this up.
Or if anybody's created any custom apps afterwards, we'd love to see what you've done or made any cool customizations. We always like to see that kind of thing.
Let's see. Okay, so I've got a couple of layers in the San Diego area, and I don't know if the ultimate application will be exactly what you want, but you could look at the code on GitHub and see how they're combining the pop-up. So in the information lookup, I'll create it the same way that we've created the other ones in the demo. And let's see, the key piece here is the lookup layer. And in this case, I'm going to set parcels and ballparks as lookup layers. And then when I click on the map, assuming there's a parcel here. Nope, there's no parcel there. One sec.
So how would you want
I
the
missed
content be organized in the pop-up? Would you just want it separated by like a line or some sort of border between the three different pieces of pop-up content, or would you want to define custom content that pulls from all three layers?
I just want it all to show up. Other than that, I don't have to.
If I can, I'm having a hard time getting a map that's set up with the right number of coincident layers, but I can give you my contact information if you want to follow up later.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. We appreciate you coming.